Hello, I'm Admiral Rachel Levine. Climate change is having a disproportionate effect on the physical and mental health of Black communities. Black Americans are more likely than white Americans to live in areas and housing that increase their susceptibility to climate-related health issues. And 65% of Black Americans report feeling anxious about climate change's impact. Through our Office of Climate Change and Health Equity and the Office of Environmental Justice, we're working with providers and community leaders to identify innovative approaches that empower communities to address the health consequences linked to climate change.
It's just, in so many ways, it just perfectly sums up what we've become. And I both find it hilarious and so sad. Joining me now, my friend Steve Deace of the great Steve Deace Show. Steve, so we got a dude pretend to be a chick talking about made-up climate change, which is not real, and also saying made-up climate change affects Black people more than it does white people. I wish that wasn't just so chef's kiss for who we are, but man, that pretty much sums it up, Steve. Maybe we don't even have to talk. That's who we are now.
He's a dude impersonating another dude impersonating another dude. Basically, Idiocracy and Tropic Thunder are essentially now plot lines and not movies. They're nonfiction. They're documentaries now, Jesse, is what they are. The graphic that was over your shoulder explained it perfectly. This is America's new religion. And here are some iron laws of the universe. These are metaphysical facts of certitude. Something or someone must reign, R-E-I-G-N. Something or someone must be worshipped. And this is just true of the human species. It's the way we were created, the way we were designed. It has been true of every society and culture that's ever existed. It will be true of every society and culture that ever will. The very first fully atheistic state by name was the Soviet Union in all of human history. And they announced themselves by taking over a former church called the Kremlin and making the government God. And in the end, we are fulfilling what the great G.K. Chesterton once acknowledged, which is that when the government removes the God, the government becomes the God. Why? Because something must rule, something must reign, and something must be worshipped. And so if it won't be God, it'll be ourselves or the state, or there'll be a package deal.
Steve, how could something as evil as communism, as government, how could it ever be something people would want to worship? I don't expect everyone to share my belief system or your belief system. All right, fine. If you have no time for Jesus, okay, believe me, that's your business. It's not my problem. But if I woke up tomorrow and decided that I'm done with this whole Jesus thing, I would not go to the government. They suck. Why would anyone pick the government?
Indoctrination. I mean, we're living through decades now of indoctrination to this end. And the difference between how the West is accepting this compared to the previous iterations of nations is they were at their most broken point. Whether you're talking about the post-World War II China, whether you're talking about post-Romanov Russia, we're talking about nations where the ruling class has essentially failed the country, and they're at a breaking point, and they're willing to take virtually any utopian promise of a better tomorrow, as you saw in fascism, which often finds itself in opposition to communism. But we saw that take hold in post-World War I Germany for the same reasons. What's happened here is we're not at any form of a Cloward Piven breaking point. Well, we weren't before we started accepting this. Communism is bringing us to that point now, but we weren't there yet. And so this had to be indoctrinated. And what happened is, there's been a lot of talk about Saul Alinsky and rules for radicals, but really if you want to understand the era that we're in today, you have to go back and you have to study an Italian communist from the 30s named Antonio Gramsci. And Antonio Gramsci was a Trotskyite. And if you understand communism, as I know you do, there were kind of the two great, challengers post-Lenin of Stalin and Trotsky. Stalin understood will to power. Trotsky was basically the idealist. He really believed this is going to usher in some form of humanistic, Pax Romana. And Gramsci was out of this mode. And he kind of fell out of favor with some of his fellow Marxists because he did not want to become militant. He thought it wouldn't work. He thought it would turn people off, actually. It would rally them to pay patriotism to oppose what they were offering. And so he suggested a more benign form of mobilization. And in his prison letters, and he was put in prison by Mussolini as a fascist, and while he was in prison, he wrote a series of letters, and they were called literally the prison letters. And one of them suggested what he called a, quote, long march through the institutions, that by infiltrating the West institutions and then steering them in a different direction from being institutions that were created to stop people like Antonio Gramsci, but are now being used to essentially enable their very ideologies, they could over time generationally ingratiate the West to Marxism. And that's precisely what has transpired in our era, and we're living through that now. We are living through the harvest of watching the long march to the institutions being completed.